Well, there's a new Russo-Turkish deal to keep the war in northern Syria from erupting into a full-scale war. Of course, the Trump administration, on their way out of northern Syria last week, brokered a 5-day ceasefire, which at the time I labeled as meaningless, because the Turks, the way that they were talking in the media, were talking very tough and essentially sounded like they had absolutely no respect for the deal, and just sort of, told Trump what he wanted to hear, but then, we're acting like we're going to do whatever we want anyway. And while the fighting did continue to some extent in different places, overall, I think at this point it looks like that the Trump ceasefire did do some good and kept this situation from really spiraling out of control. So I will give the president props for that, and I will apologize for saying that it was totally meaningless. Because it turns out that I think the Turks were just talking a lot tougher than they were actually decided to act. Had the Turks, really acted the way that they were speaking at the time, then I think I would have been right. But it seems as though the Turks, despite what the Western media is telling us about how they're just, absolute monsters and butchering everyone, they seem to not want to make it look like they're doing that. They don't actually want to be the ones to expel the YPG from northern Syria. They wanted to give the U.S. a chance to do that, and and now they're very much hemming and hawing about how the U.S. failed to do that within the 5-day time period. But the Turks still seem reluctant to actually do it themselves, and so they've made this deal now with Russia, and now the Russians are supposed to come in and expel the YPG. Because remember, this whole time, what the Turks have, their legitimate national security concern has been is that, the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party in Turkey, is, an enemy of the Turkish state because they want to have an independent Kurdistan. And, of course, a large chunk of Kurdistan is, meaning the areas populated by Kurdish people, is in the Republic of Turkey. And that land runs right across the border from Turkey into Syria. So, Syrian Kurdistan is, tied at the hip, literally, to Turkish Kurdistan. And so Erdogan does not want the YPG to have, the ability to launch cross-border raids into Turkey and to help out and coordinate with, their PKK friends. Now, of course, an easier and more humane solution, in my opinion, would just be to grant independence to, parts of your country that don't want to be ruled by you. It does seem rather odd from the perspective of someone who, might be a Turkish nationalist to want to hold on to this territory that has so many non-Turks in it. You would think that you would want a pure ethno-state, but Erdogan is not really a pure Turkish nationalists, like, say, Ataturk was, who, wanted to expel all non-Turks from Turkish territory. Erdogan is much more imperially minded, I guess, if that's a correct way of using that term. He wants to control beyond just the lands of the Turkish people. He wants to have a sphere of influence. He wants to be a regional power. He kind of like how the Russians see, Belarus and Ukraine as like little Russias. Erdogan sees the surrounding countries around Turkey as sort of junior partners in a neo-Ottoman empire. That's why he originally wanted to overthrow Assad and replace him with a Turkish allied government that could sort of be his little puppet. And that's also why he's not interested in giving up, any territory to the Kurds, even though, it really is going to be an endless war, or at least an endless struggle in the east of Turkey for them to try and hang on to that territory that is populated by people that hate them so much. And so that's why you have to understand that broader context if you're to understand why Erdogan is even in Syria right now. This is all about trying to, not lose any ground to the Kurds. And so under this agreement, Russian military policemen, as well as border guards of the Syrian Arab Republic, that is the Assad government, are going to move in to the this safe zone area, this 30-kilometer belt in northeast Syria, and they are going to take over the border and run those border checkpoints and expel the YPG administrators. And so therefore they will create a buffer between the YPG and Turkey. So the YPG will not have a presence directly on the Syrian-Turkish border. They will then not have any direct connection to the PKK. They won't be able to, say, funnel weapons across the border. They won't be able to launch cross-border raids because they will have that belt of Russian and Syrian troops between them. And this really, to me, has been, the best solution all along. If the U.S. really wanted to pull out of Syria, they should have just said to, Assad, hey, come back and reestablish your border because, Erdogan, even though he doesn't like you, at least, he doesn't have an excuse to invade. Erdogan's not going to try and invade and overthrow Assad because that already didn't work. They already failed that. So if Assad comes back and reestablishes, his border with Turkey, with the Kurds on the other side, behind Assad, well then the Turks have no remotely legitimate reason to invade Syria. Now, what's interesting, though, is that under this deal, this is just a ceasefire. This is not a negotiated withdrawal of the Turks. The Turks have not agreed to pull out as of yet. But I think that this is a step in that direction. I don't think that if this ceasefire holds, which it's a short one, it's only 150 hours, I don't see that the next step after this will be the Turks asserting greater control. I don't, for example, think that the Turks will be able to start importing Syrian refugees and dumping them in northern Syria if Assad and Russia are also established there. Because what they're doing right now is they're going to have joint Russo-Turkish patrols, to, I guess, police this area and make sure that there are no militants left over, whether they be Kurdish, Arab, or otherwise. This really is a step for the Russians and the Assad government to reestablish themselves in the farthest north and east quadrant of Syria, to get their presence back on the border. And once they have a presence there, they're not going to retreat. It's very clear that the next step would be for the Kurds, or not the Kurds, for the Turks to have to withdraw. And so I'm starting to become a little more optimistic. I do think that things seem to be going up. I do think that this past ceasefire, despite all of the Turks hemming and hawing, it did seem to be, in hindsight, like it was a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, however, it seems as though things are getting better despite the U.S.'s efforts, but not so much because of them. Because the U.S. apparently is still telling the Kurds, you shouldn't work with Russia and Assad, they're bad guys. Shouldn't do that. And, if the Kurds really listened to the U.S. and they completely resisted the Russians and the Assad government, well, then, they're going to get screwed. Because they're going to get attacked by the Turks. So we'll see how it goes from here. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.